the earliest development of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Filmation were figuring out the foundations for the world of Eternia, the lore, and the core cast for the show. One location that presented a great deal of mystery was Castle Grayskull. The legendary location was a source of great power and some confusion, as the mini-comics and DC comic books at the time presented slightly different takes on the castle. One thing that was often present early on was the spirit of Grayskull. Some of the earliest drafts of the earliest scripts, such as the original draft for the Cosmic Comet, have the spirit of Grayskull speak to the heroes. Eventually, the spirit was introduced into the series in one episode, Teela's Triumph. A character that Filmation took great interest in was the Goddess, a mystical being that would act as a guide to He-Man and his allies. Filmation introduced the notion that the Goddess would be the guardian within the walls of Castle Grayskull, and also that she would be able to transform into the fighting falcon Zor.
I am the Sorceress of Grayskull.
DC Comics had already introduced the moniker of the Sorceress when referring to the Goddess, though she would often still be referred to as the Goddess. Filmation decided that the Sorceress would be her prominent name. However, Filmation's initial design for the character, which showed up in the licensee guide and Robbie London's series Bible, saw a very different take visually on the character. As you can see, a cloaked, blonde, purple-skinned woman. She was still able to transform into Zor the Falcon, but her costume did not reflect this. Filmation would look to an earlier Mattel property, one they nearly worked on, for inspiration. In last week's Friday Night Trivia, I talked about how Filmation took the Mattel character the Goddess, a mystical being introduced into the Masters of the Universe mini-comics, and turned her into the Sorceress, the guardian of Castle Grayskull. However, Filmation's initial design for the character, which showed up in the licensee guide and Robbie London's series Bible, saw a very different take visually on the character. Now, seemingly unrelated, in the late 70s, Filmation produced an animated block of cartoons titled The Super 7. The block featured an array of Filmation action-adventure cartoons. Originally, a show developed titled Sunbright and Starlight, penned by Buzz Dixon, was supposed to be a part of the Super 7. Sadly, Sunbright and Starlight was shelved as, according to Lou Scheimer in an interview with Andy Mangels, CBS weren't all that interested in it, although they happily supported all of the other shows within the Super 7 block. I'll talk more about that in a wonderfully detailed dedicated video in the future. For now, I'll simply mention that around about the same time, Mattel were developing the female-focused Guardian Goddesses toy line featuring Sunspell and Moon Mystic, clearly in some way connected to Filmation's planned Sunbright and Starlight cartoon. During the mid to late 70s and prior to Masters of the Universe, Filmation and Mattel had a good relationship, with Mattel producing toy lines based on Filmation cartoons. So the connection is there. Now you may be scratching your heads as to how this is connected to the Sorceress. Well, as part of the Guardian Goddesses toy line, costumes for the two dolls, sold separately, were available. One of these costumes may look strikingly familiar: Soaring Eagle. Now, I've never had the connection confirmed, so this is more trivia than most, but it cannot be a coincidence that Filmation, who had a close working relationship with Mattel, redesigned the Sorceress with a costume strikingly similar to that of Soaring Eagle. Traditional stories often feature the battle between good and evil. In a comic book or a TV series, these battles would be ongoing, featuring erstwhile foes and a seemingly endless tussle for power. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe and She-Ra, Princess of Power, were no different. Filmation prided themselves on telling wholesome stories that saw the heroes prevail, like many a cartoon during the decades either side of and including the 1980s. However, the very premise of the She-Ra series presented something rather unique. The bad guys, the Evil Horde, had technically already won, ruling the planet of Etheria. That said, from episode to episode, the heroes, the Great Rebellion, would win the day, leading to the Horde's oppressive rule never feeling as fully fleshed out as what Larry DiTillio had envisioned when he wrote the series Bible. And this is where we come to the Season 1 episode, The Price of Freedom, written by Bob Ford. In that episode, both She-Ra and He-Man find themselves desperately trying to save the village of Dryall. They perform their usual antics before being driven from the village. With the village now empty, the Horde burn it to the ground at Hordak's command. And if that wasn't bad enough, as She-Ra and Swiftwind leave for help, He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe, is defeated by the ferocity of the Horde's firepower. Yes, He-Man is defeated, and with that, Hordak and the Evil Horde leave. And that is the last we see of them in the episode. Hordak victorious. There is no end of episode comeuppance for the villains, the heroes simply lose, thus reminding us that the Horde rule Etheria. Alongside the late, great Linda Gary, Melinda Britt was one of Filmation's go-to voice talents. Her first notable role for the company was as Batgirl and Catwoman in the New Adventures of Batman show, but it was her role as Princess Aura in Filmation's fantastic Flash Gordon cartoon that caught everyone's attention.
I will not be questioned. Understand me, Flash Gordon. I can give you life, perhaps even more.
Melinda's depiction of Aura, coupled with Filmation's character design, oozed as much sexuality as Saturday morning cartoons would allow for. Alongside her voice work, Melinda appeared in many TV shows.
I know. This is from my gold card. They were concerned about the accelerated activity on my account. In 2 days, you've managed to spend over $10,000.
Filmation clearly thought very highly of Melinda and, in 1985, cast her as Princess Adora, She-Ra, the Princess of Power. The cartoon was watched by millions worldwide. However, what is not always appreciated are the other roles that Melinda performed in the series, and I for one would argue were just as memorable. Alongside Adora and She-Ra, Melinda Britt also voiced Catra, which at times sounded like an incredibly taxing voice, Mamista, one of my favourite voices, an Etherian with a French accent, and also Octavia, who only made 2 appearances, but that voice would give Alan Oppenheimer's Merman a run for his money. But the voice I briefly want to touch upon is that of the Queen of Mysticor, Castaspella.
Believe me, Casta, he's sweet and harmless. Harmless? Oh, my dear, there you're such a trusting soul. There's no such thing as a harmless dragon.
As a kid, I always enjoyed her oddly unique voice, but it wasn't until my late teens, early 20s as I began to explore classic films and heard a rather familiar voice.
You either are immune to it or you fight it. 10 centuries ago, and even less, the treatment was quite simple. Burn them. Burn their bodies, burn their houses, burn their clothes, and move to another town.
That of legendary actress Katharine Hepburn. I immediately realised that Castaspella's voice was an impersonation of the famous Hollywood star. What we do know is that often prior to a vocal audition, the actors would be shown a character sketch, and it's fair to say that Castaspella was designed facially to look a little older than her castmates. I just adore the fact that Melindy Britt decided to perform her Katharine Hepburn voice for Castaspella. It made the character feel more noble and more captivating when on screen, much like the performances of Katharine Hepburn. The UK Masters of the Universe comic was a much celebrated and long-running piece of Masters of the Universe lore. Depending on the artist, we would sometimes see toy-accurate versions of the characters, and sometimes we would see Filmation-accurate versions of the characters. And I can say that for the most part, the colours were often correct. Well, except Faker, but then who knew what to do with that guy? And so we come to Whiplash. Here he is in issue 6 of the comic, and he looks pretty cartoon accurate, right? Well, when the UK comic became even more popular, a second title was added, Masters of the Universe Adventure Magazine. These issues would have a far greater page count and be released monthly, featuring a single lengthy story with a couple of reprints thrown in for good measure. The odd thing is, with the adventure publication, the colorist decided to have some fun and play around with the colour schemes, primarily for the villains. And thus we come to the memorable story Altered States, in which He-Man finds himself oddly cursed with some very random abilities that enable him to defeat his foes. When Whiplash shows up, the colorist decides that instead of the shades of green we have become accustomed to, the tail-thrashing warrior should now sport a blue, grey and purple colour scheme. I won't lie, I do like the craziness of this colour scheme, and it looks good on the model sheet, as you can see. The thing that makes me scratch my head is that Mattel would have surely signed off on this, unless maybe random colours on their characters wasn't seen as a bad thing. There is another collection of very random colour schemes for some established characters that show up in the Masters of the Universe adventure comic that I will showcase another time. You have been warned. Character continuity on the She-Ra Princess of Power series was high, as staff writers Larry DiTillio, J. Michael Straczynski and eventually Robert Lamb did their best to rewrite scripts in which freelance writers may have made an error with regards to a character's personality or power. Glimmer in the series Bible often created a few problems as the character was described as having a jewel in the palm of her hand. Thus, numerous scripts made reference to this and had to be altered during the rewrite stage, though 1 or 2 episodes do still make reference to the jewel. Aside from her ability to control light, one of the least used powers appeared in the episodes Into Etheria, Beast Island and Small Problems. In those 3 episodes, Glimmer demonstrated the ability to teleport, and it seemed to come in very useful.
Have a nice nap, fellas.
This would have made her such a powerful character throughout the series, but a decision somewhere in production meant that she did not use these powers to get herself out of dangerous situations when it was obvious that she could have. By the time season 2 of She-Ra rolled around, Larry DiTillio and J. Michael Straczynski had left Filmation, and Robert Lamb had returned to storyboarding. Thus, season 2 saw a somewhat lack of continuity, and Glimmer's powers go crazy, because in the episodes Return of the General and Portrait of Doom, Glimmer could now fly. Yes, fly. It was never explained how Glimmer, whose ability to control light, could fly. The last new power that Glimmer demonstrated in season 2 was the most impressive and easily the most ridiculous. In the episode The Perils of Peekaboo, Glimmer demonstrates the ability to turn herself invisible. Not only that, but she can also turn others invisible. Now, in the previous 79 episodes, this ability would have gotten her and her friends out of a great many scrapes. Oh Glimmer, you and your crazy powers. In the fantastical worlds of Eternia and Etheria, character origins were always very much up in the air, depending on the writer and the canon. We all know that Michael Halperin's memorable vision for Evil-Lyn's origin saw her as Evelyn Powers, a name I love by the way, one of the Earth astronauts aboard Marlena Glenn's ship, the future Queen Marlena. Having crash landed on Eternia, Evelyn Powers and Biff Beastman and Dr. T.E. Scope became a part of Skeletor's ever-growing evil warriors as Evil-Lyn, Beastman and Triclops respectively. This origin is the most common and referred to in the media, most memorably in the Golden Book New Champions of Eternia, and a fantastic unpublished Masters of the Universe newspaper strip penned by Christy Marks and illustrated by Larry Houston. Another take on Evil-Lyn's backstory was presented in issue 22 of the UK Masters of the Universe comic. This origin, as presented in The Secret Files of Skrullos, reveals to us that Evil-Lyn was once a young woman who possessed magical powers, surprisingly serving King Randor and Queen Marlena in the royal household. Upon learning of Skeletor's presence on Eternia, the young woman used her magical abilities to transform herself into Evil-Lyn and asked to join Skeletor's army. I will admit I do prefer this origin, as it makes Marlena Glenn feel more unique as the sole astronaut hailing from the planet Earth. It's funny when you think about it, even though we visit Orko's homeworld numerous times in the He-Man and the Masters of the Universe series, and once in the She-Ra series, and even though we meet his uncle Montauk, his eventual girlfriend Driel, her younger brother Yuccas, and a plethora of random Trollans, we never actually meet Orko's parents, with the little blue guy never even mentioning them. However, we do know what they look like, and, in fact, we see them more than any other Trollan in the series. It's just that we, the audience, are never explicitly given this information. Orko's room, seen many times in the series, often in a bit of a state, has some unique items located within it, his bed being the most visually striking, and that weird looking plush toy that often resides on it. But looking on the wall behind his bed, we can clearly see two large, rather prominent portraits. These are actually portraits of Orko's mother and father. Interestingly, both of them are depicted with the letter O on their robes. Now, these characters remained unnamed until April the 23rd, 2024, when Robbie London, you know, the guy that created Orko, responded to my request and named the father Olam and the mother Aura. So, had Robbie London penned an episode featuring Orko's parents, those are the official names he would have given them. Now, as you can see, Dusan Mitrovic used his skills to recreate the line art of Olam and Aura, whilst reminding me that there was another Trollan portrait on the wall, which he also restored the line art of. Dusan asked me if he could name the third Trollan himself, which he and I believe to be Orko's grandfather, though that's not confirmed. And given that he works so hard on this channel, I thought that it only seemed right. And so we have Aurelus. But here's where this video takes a rather unexpected twist. At one point during 1983, possibly 1984, Mattel were considering making action figures of both Olam and Aura. As you can see from this less than stellar Polaroid photograph I have of a rarely seen UK catalogue, the figures had at least made it to the prototype stage, simply named Orko's father and Orko's mother. At least that's what I can make out. Also, here's a page from the 1987 live action movie, and yes, they were going to appear in that too. And from what I've heard, they're due to appear in the forthcoming Masters of the Universe live action movie. Okay, so at what point did you stop believing me? No, none of that last part is true. Robbie London naming them, that part is true. Another piece of truth is that the ever-talented action figure customizer, Joe Amato, say hello Joe.
Hello Joe.
Actually looked at the characters and decided to bring them to life. Not only that, but he also created their card backs, and if you look, our dear friend, the evil wizard Dusan Mitrovic, unleashed his creative talents and illustrated a card-back scene for the pair, as well as the instructions on how to use the ripcord. So there you have it. The Season 2 He-Man and the Masters of the Universe episode Betrayal of Stratos features a rather interesting scene that creates a few continuity problems with the tail-thrashing villain Whiplash.
Crawl, King of Demons, why have you summoned me?
Crawl, the King of Demons in the Demon Zone, appears to be Whiplash's master of sorts, even though, at this point in the second season, it had already been established that Whiplash worked for the Lord of Destruction, Skeletor. Even more confusing is that Crawl appears to know of his services to Skeletor, which begs the question, what is Crawl's relationship to Whiplash? The script for Betrayal of Stratos states that the Demon Zone is where Whiplash resides when not serving Skeletor, which does create a wonderful sense of mystery around the villain. It should be noted that the design of Crawl is actually the same as Daimar from the Season 1 episode Daimar the Demon. The image of Crawl is quite evil and probably scared a few children, his red face surrounded by flames. It didn't scare me much. Even more interesting are the carvings on the side of the fire pit, which also resemble his face. The model pack for the episode shows Crawl's entire form, and it should come as no surprise that the rest of him was repurposed from Daimar's design. Sadly, Crawl never shows up in the series again, and Whiplash never returns to the Demon Zone. Oh.
They should call you Whiplash.
Just give me another chance to get my claws on that Ice Raider.
Quiet, or I'll turn you into a suitcase.
He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe, was always performing some sort of crazy heroic feat from episode to episode, right? And the Season 1 episode Return of the Gryphon is no exception, with He-Man doing everything from fighting the titular Gryphon to throwing the same creature into outer space, and even performing some effortless gymnastics. Okay, maybe that last one isn't as impressive as the others. The final big set piece of the episode sees He-Man lift a mountain, yes, a mountain, and throw it into a huge lake, causing a tidal wave of water to extinguish the flames that engulf the beautiful, fertile plains. Prior to this rather astounding demonstration of strength, He-Man has to run a great distance in order to reach the mountain. Now, normally, when He-Man would have to run a fair distance, we would see that awesomely smooth run cycle, usually on a bike pan background. In animation, a bike pan is a panning shot that repeats itself, often with the same elements going past. Well, in this instance, the director, Gwen Wetzler, comes up with a rather exciting visual to showcase He-Man's great speed. As He-Man begins to run, the background slowly crossfades to one of the transitions used in many an episode, and by soft focusing He-Man, it appears that not only is the most powerful man in the universe running ridiculously fast, but that he is also running through the very episode itself. I think you'll agree that this is a rather lovely and creative way of showing something we have seen numerous times before. If you ever want to annoy a fan of the UK Masters of the Universe comic like me, or even UK Masters of the Universe comic historian Aidan Cross, then just tell us how it was cool that we got to see Shadow Weaver's origin as Light Spinner in the Filmation cartoon. Ugh.
Light Spinner has all to do with Filmation. She's from the UK comics. For sake, she was never called Light Spinner in Filmation.
It's okay, Aidan. Breathe. So yeah, the reason that this annoys a few of us is that Light Spinner was never a character in the Filmation cartoon. Yes, we got to see Shadow Weaver's teenage self in the excellent J. Michael Straczynski penned The Price of Power episode, but no name was given to the character in the script or in any behind the scenes materials associated with the She-Ra Princess of Power cartoon. All we knew of her life before she became Shadow Weaver was that she was a former sorceress of Mystacor who had been close friends with Castaspella. And with that said, in issue 23 of the UK Masters of the Universe comic, The Secret Files of Skrullos revealed a different origin for Shadow Weaver. It is told that Shadow Weaver was once a young sorceress called Light Spinner, get it? Shadow Weaver, Light Spinner? Who was taught the evil ways of the Dark Force by Hordak. Now, I've always liked this origin for Shadow Weaver, as brief as it is, because it makes mention of Hordak's magical abilities, something he would vigorously turn his back on in favour of Horde science. And Horde science was, in the Filmation cartoon, what transformed the former sorceress of Mystacor into Shadow Weaver. So many of us Masters of the Universe fans owned Panthor, right? I still remember buying the purple flock tiger one winter's evening in a Tesco's store, which back then was a strange place to buy action figures. That said, I also purchased the Transformers smokescreen from there too, so I guess it was a place I bought toys. Well, Panthor, like Faker, was somewhat infamous for being the Battlecat mould reused, which of course itself was a twice used reuse for Skeletor's steed. Much like Faker, thought and creativity was put into Panthor to give him a reason to exist, and from a toy marketing point of view, a toy that had texture with piercing golden eyes was pretty awesome.
Nice kitty.
What is interesting is that Panthor's earliest design for animation had him as a direct clone of Battlecat, minus the stripes. This illustration from the Filmation series Bible and licensee guide shows Panthor with an earlier colour scheme, an actual Black Panther with purple armour. Fortunately, the Filmation character designers would eventually be presented with the Mattel prototype, and they ditched the helmet and made him the evil, vicious Purple Panther we all know and love, or should that be know and fear? Filmation's Flash Gordon, specifically their primetime special, The Greatest Adventure of All, is a truly fantastic piece of animation. I saw parts of it briefly as a child one morning in the early 80s, but didn't pay too much attention to it. In 1993, when cable TV finally arrived at our house, I was able to watch the Flash Gordon animated series that had somehow evaded me for well over a decade. Needless to say, I enjoyed it a great deal, and let's be honest, it was hard to take our eyes off of the screen whenever Princess Aura, voiced by Melindy Britt, would appear, stealing many a scene. But there was always something unique about her design that caught my eye. It wasn't until 2005 when I first stumbled upon the Princess Aura model sheets that I realised what had caught my eye. And it was pretty much given away with this pose. That's Teela, I thought to myself, and soon whipped out the Teela model sheet I had to hand and compared the two. I was somewhat taken aback by the similarity in the facial structure, the shape of the forehead and the eyebrows, the eyes, the tiara, and the hair bunched up in front of the tiara. One could easily present the Princess Aura model sheet to someone that has never seen Filmation's Flash Gordon and have them think that this was an alternative costume that Teela rocked from time to time, and recolouring the model sheet to look like Teela would certainly create that illusion. All that said, the two characters were far from possessing the same personality. Methinks Teela would have very little time for Aura. First appearing in the Season 1 He-Man and the Masters of the Universe episode A Friend in Need, we see that within the grounds of the Royal Palace, android horses are stored. Teela and the meek Elena use the horses which, even though robotic in nature, are frightened by the explosive geysers of the geyser field.
Oh no! The geyser field! Hurry before the gas overcomes us!
Throughout the first season, the android horses would pop up in the episodes The Royal Cousin and even A Tale of Two Cities, where they were used by the noble people of Operon. Methinks that wasn't a connection to Eternos, just a means to an end visually. The final appearance of the android horse design in the episode Pawns of the Game Master gives some hint as to the origin of the steed, with Prince Adam referring to it as Stridor, not Stridor, Stridor.
All you have to do is sit in the saddle and say, "Forward, Stridor! Go! Play! Give the ball!"
By the time the premiere episode of the final 32 episodes entered production, Origin of the Sorceress, Mattel had created their mighty robotic steed, Stridor, and the android horses we had seen up until this point would never show up again, retired by a steed that had an accompanying toy. That said, by the end of the episode, Stridor's act of heroism, saving Eternia from Morgoth, the now emotionally driven Stridor heads out into the wild, never to return. Aww. As I've said before numerous times on this channel, Filmation's storyboard department consisted of a group of talented people who not only enjoyed their work on the He-Man and She-Ra shows, but who also loved to include jokes within their storyboards. Aside from being one of the nicest guys in the animation industry, storyboard artist, director and occasional animator Tom Cito was a part of this group during his time at Filmation. Cito's storyboards were always great fun to look at, clear and concise, but often laced with a lot of visual comedy. Just look at Skeletor here, it's one of the funniest illustrations you're ever likely to see. When it came to storyboarding the Season 1 He-Man and the Masters of the Universe episode The Heart of a Giant, the script called for a collection of creatures to surround the cruel villain known as the Keeper. Well, Tom Cito used the creatures already established in the episode as per the script and added a few of his own. If you look at the far right of this panel, you will see that Cito added Snoopy and a Smurf. Amusingly, to ensure that this would not end up illustrated into the layout stage of animation, Tom Cito's board was hurriedly revised to modify Snoopy and the Smurf. I mean, just look how evil they look now. The final animation sequence contains neither of these characters, which is a shame. I kind of wish the pair had made a cameo, but methinks that could have led to a few legal problems down the line. Trapjaw, one of my favourite of Skeletor's evil warriors, one of the coolest action figures with one of the most exciting and memorable star-making mini-comic appearances.
Trapjaw, wizard of weapons.
Filmation's take on Trapjaw was fantastic. Debuting in Diamond Rare's Disappearance, the Wizard of Weapons appeared alongside the other evil warriors, and with his vibrant colours, gruff voice and unique gimmick of interchanging his weaponry, he managed to make it all the way until the end of the series, appearing in the She-Ra Princess of Power episode Assault on the Hive, the final He-Man crossover episode. Across the series and in this order, we saw Trapjaw sport a hook, the attachment that was used the most, a whopping 36 times in total, a lasertron, an energy bow, a saw blade, a pile driver, a dropper, a grabber, a swatter, a mini laser, a flamethrower, a fire extinguisher, a long laser, a freeze ray, and even a rocket, which is actually less of a weapon and more of a means of escape, as the heroes gain the upper hand in the aforementioned assault on the hive and Trapjaw flies into outer space. The rarest attachment and the reason for this piece of trivia was noteworthy because 1. It was one of the 3 attachments that came with the action figure, and 2. It was designed to be one of his main attachments, even showing up on the model sheet. The claw. The claw attachment shows up in one single episode, in one single blink and you'll miss it shot, Golden Discs of Knowledge.
There's no escape for you now!
And there it is. How bizarre. One of the most memorable locations in He-Man and the Masters of the Universe was the mysterious Sands of Time, a seemingly endless desert that appeared to take up much of the planet of Eternia, and where many a traveller would meet their fate. The Temple of the Sun was an impressively ancient structure located somewhere in the Sands of Time. It appeared a total of 3 times in the series, but each time it would be presented rather differently, almost as if the writers had no idea what exactly to do with it. The temple's initial appearance was in the Season 1 episode Temple of the Sun, in which Nepthu, an old man seeking great power, located the mighty Scarab, an artifact that transforms him into a powerful wizard. And as a single episode location, it works perfectly. It feels shrouded in mystery, and it's a mission in itself for the heroes to locate. Thus, when it appears in the Season 2 episode The Great Book's Mystery, it doesn't feel nearly as mysterious, used simply as a base of operations by the villain Batros. And bizarrely, Teela and Orko walk, yes walk, from the royal palace to the temple. I cannot stress how crazy that is. The temple seems to have no definitive reason for appearing in this episode and is used only as a storehouse for stolen books. Writer J. Michael Straczynski, who was usually a stickler for continuity, kind of failed when it came to writing the Season 2 episode Trouble's Middle Name. The reason I say failed is that in the temple's 3rd appearance, all past continuity appears to have been thrown out of the window. This time, the Sunstone is a part of the temple, and the script indicates that it always has been. By far the strangest inclusion in this script is that of 2 men who are the keepers of the Sunstone, and again, the suggestion is that they always have been. Very odd. Whenever the Widgets were in trouble and their fortress threatened, they would often employ the signal flare and summon the most powerful man in the universe. Yes, some of you watching may be surprised that He-Man had his very own bat signal, and much like the bat signal, the He-Man signal featured the emblem that adorned his costume. And thankfully, every time they fired the flare, He-Man just happened to see it. What a stroke of luck. Now, there is an obvious connection here. Writer Paul Dini was a huge fan of Marvel and DC comics, so it makes sense that he would employ this gimmick in the He-Man series. The first time we see the He-Man signal employed was in the episode Evil-Lyn's Plot, an episode that also reveals that He-Man's harness was fashioned by the sorceress from Korodite, the strongest material on Eternia. In another Paul Dini episode, The Mystery of Many Faces, we see the original cannon that was used to summon He-Man, but it was destroyed by Many Faces. That big old meanie. The next time we see the signal flare used was in the episode Jacob and the Widgets, and it could be argued that it's the best looking, appearing at an angle over the setting sun. Glorious. Finally, much is made of the Widget signal flare in the episode The Littlest Giant, perhaps more so than in any other. Usually it is regarded as a measure to be employed only in extreme circumstances, but this time the widgets use it twice in one single act. In both instances, Prince Adam is the one to spot the flare, so this necessitates 2 transformation sequences in the first act. The first time, Adam and Orko are alone in the forest for no apparent reason, and later it is Adam and Cringer that see the second flare. This time, Adam appears ready for bed as he is in his nightshirt looking out of the window. Just look at that glorious He-Man signal. Na 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 na. He-Man. Okay, so it may not be one of the greatest mysteries of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. That would probably be, where does Prince Adam's Sword of Power go? And we've already covered that on this channel. It goes to the very same place that Optimus Prime's trailer goes to. However, another question with regards to the cartoon does pop up on occasion. Where on earth did Trapjaw keep all those wonderful attachments? The action figure had the attachments lock onto his belt, but in the cartoon it is obvious that no weapons hang from his belt. But in Trapjaw's final appearance in the She-Ra Princess of Power episode Assault on the Hive, the final He-Man crossover, we see where Trapjaw keeps his attachments. In that particular episode, the Wizard of Weapons is at Snake Mountain, preparing for his mission alongside Beastman under Skeletor's command to overthrow Sweet Bee and her people. Now, context. Every single time we would see this stock sequence of Trapjaw changing his attachments, it would be framed like this. But in Assault on the Hive, it is framed like this. And thus, we see this happen. Here it is again, but closer. Yes, Trapjaw's arm attachments simply appear out of thin air, like Prince Adam's Sword of Power and Optimus Prime's trailer. Yeah, I don't think this is canon, but hey, let's go with it. The Sword of Power, one of the most striking swords of the 1980s, one of the most memorable symbols of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, created by the Ancients and imbued with their great power, housed within the walls of Castle Grayskull, guarded by the Sorceress, and used to channel Grayskull's magic, enabling the Prince of Eternia to transform into the most powerful man in the universe, He-Man. So, where did Adam hide this mighty weapon when he went to bed? In the Season 1 episode, The Mystery of Man-E-Faces, during a flashback to the events of how Man-E-Faces first appeared on Eternia, we see Prince Adam and Cringer awoken by Zor the Falcon. By the time Zor has issued her warning, like something out of Batman, a button is pushed and the bookcase slides to one side, revealing the Sword of Power. Now, for the longest time, I thought this was Paul Dini's idea, given that he is such a huge fan of Batman. However, upon seeing the final script, there is absolutely no mention of the bookcase, with Adam just suddenly having the sword in his hand, ready to transform. Luckily, I am good friends with the storyboard artist for this episode, Vic Dalkelly, who revealed that it was actually his idea, once again proving how much the storyboard department cared about the end product. To quote Vic, "Yeah, I thought Adam didn't sleep with the sword, so I contrived that it would be hidden in his bedroom." How fun is that? We see the bookcase utilised once again in the Season 2 episodes The Littlest Giant and Bargain with Evil, with the latter being unique. Unlike the previous occasions, Prince Adam is in his more familiar clothing, with the bookcase already revealing the Sword of Power. If you're like me, then you adore the episode title cards for He-Man and the Masters of the Universe and She-Ra, Princess of Power. Many of these title cards were atmospheric and allowed our minds to wander, as some of these locations were somewhat unique. I think my favourite title cards for He-Man were the Ancient Ruins. I love just how the structure is favoured to one side, just what are these ruins a part of? And the Mysterious Forest, which, upon closer inspection, depicts a gorgeous sunset with the sun's rays illuminating a mountain in the distance. And for She-Ra, it has to be the Hellish Fright Zone throne room. I mean, just how amazing does this image look, and those very unique looking Horde troopers with green eyes. And the beautiful depiction of Castle Brightmoon, with the Whispering Woods almost consuming the structure with its gorgeously lush flora. But in this video, I want to showcase some of the oddities, and since I've been talking about backgrounds, what better place to start than with the rarest title card background used, that of Snake Mountain's entrance behind Blood Falls. This background was only ever used in one episode, the Time Corridor. Now, I do have a suspicion as to why it was only used once, because it was technically not a title card background. This image is actually a part of a very noteworthy panning shot as seen in the episode The Dragon Invasion, so it would have been stored within the Snake Mountain pan backgrounds and not in the title card box with the other title cards. Next we have 5 episode titles that just stay on screen. Normally the title would fade away, but for these 5 episodes, Disappearing Act, A Friend in Need, Masks of Power, Orko's Favourite Uncle and The Dragon's Gift, the title was present across both writer and director credits. Now we all know how to spell He-Man's name, right? Well, on the 2 occasions that his name is a part of the title, it is actually written wrong. Quest for He-Man features a lowercase m, and Hunt for He-Man omits the mighty dash. She-Ra's name appears in 2 episode titles too. The first time in She-Ra Unchained, it is correct. The next time, it's all one word, and there is a reason for this. Throughout most scripts, the name She-Ra was written as one word, and so this is clearly a carryover of that. There were only 2 two-part stories in the entire run of He-Man and She-Ra. He-Man's was House of Shikoti, and She-Ra's was Anchors Aloft. The strange thing is, and this may have something to do with the different fonts utilised, He-Man's was written out as Part 1, whereas She-Ra's was changed to Part 1 using the Roman numerical system. Here's another odd one. The title card for the Season 2 He-Man episode Island of Fear is the only time in the series that we see 2 director credits. Famously, The Problem with Power features the very unique Based on an Idea by credit, as Tom Teller and Owitz came up with the premise for the episode, with Bob Ford writing it. Next, how many Planet Eternius have you seen in the title cards? 1? 2? There are at least 4 different versions of Eternia. Spot the differences if you can. Another oddity, the eerie mist for the Mysterious Forest was, for a time, altered during title cards for Season 2, only to return to its original form later in the series. Now here's something that not many people have spotted over the years. The 33 episodes that form the 1984 batch of Season 2 don't have any speech marks around the title. Why the speech marks were omitted is anyone's guess. And finally, when the episodes from The Greatest Adventures of All special were released to VHS individually in the UK, they used the title cards from the end of the special itself. Thus, we had title cards with both writer and director on a singular card. The star of 130 episodes of his own series, He-Man made countless very memorable cameos in the She-Ra Princess of Power series, as did his erstwhile foe Skeletor and numerous characters that we had all come to know and love from the He-Man and the Masters of the Universe cartoon. When the order for 28 episodes came through for She-Ra's second season, many of those at Filmation, especially the writers, knew that this would be their last chance to write for these wonderful characters and explore the worlds of Eternia and Etheria. Riding high on the success of He-Man's 2 seasons and She-Ra's first season, the second season of She-Ra had a lot to live up to. However, Given the wealth of talent and 3 years worth of material behind it, this season turned out to be an incredibly disappointing one. Filmation staff writers Larry DiTillio, J. Michael Straczynski and Robert Lamb, all of whom penned memorable episodes during the first season, did not write a single script for the second season, which may explain its flaws. Writer Bob Forward and director Tom Tadeusz were fortunately still a part of the series and in many ways prevented this season from becoming a complete failure. And speaking of Bob Forward, the man who penned arguably some of the greatest episodes of He-Man and She-Ra would also be the man to pen the very final appearance of He-Man and Skeletor during the Filmation era with Assault on the Hive. The very premise of the episode favours Skeletor and returning evil warriors Beastman and Trapjaw as they succeed in overthrowing Sweetbea and her people. This episode is by no means a Bob Forward classic, but it has a wonderful final moment between He-Man and Skeletor. After He-Man has commanded Comic Cat, don't ask, to fetch, the Lord of Destruction angrily voices his displeasure at the humiliation.
Blast you, you miserable cat! Let me go!
When He-Man remarks that it's the end of the line for Skeletor, a wonderful acknowledgement by the writer subtly references He-Man and Skeletor's never-ending battle, with the villain remarking,
"You ought to know me better than that by now, He-Man!"
and teleports back to Snake Mountain. It's a fantastic little moment that gives history to these characters, bowing out on easily the most popular and successful version of He-Man and Skeletor. Those ratings don't lie. In the development of the She-Ra Princess of Power cartoon, there was a character that was a big part of the Great Rebellion. This character, if all had gone to plan, would have appeared alongside the main cast in many an episode. What do I mean by if all had gone to plan? Well, the character Willawind was slowly phased out during the production of the show. The series Bible, written by the late, great Larry DiTillio, describes him as follows. Willawind is a handsome beanpole of a man who is a travelling entertainer. He sings, tells stories, he works stage magic, not the real McCoy, just sleight of hand tricks. His love of freedom prompted him to join the rebellion, and his ebullient, ham actor personality does much to lighten the load. In a battle, he is reckless and cunning, and he and Bo are good comrades. Here are a few concept designs for the character as owned by the Power and the Honor Foundation. You can see that the artists were often emphasising the beanpole of a man description as written by Larry DiTillio. When the decision to axe the character was made, his abilities were given to Bo, as well as a planned character model head, as you can see here in this piece of layout artwork. This is why Bo oddly breaks into song or performs magic tricks that at times seem out of character for the highly skilled archer. Even the episode Play It Again Bo was originally titled Play It Again Willawind. This wasn't the end of Willawind though. An earlier character model appears unnamed in the very first episode of She-Ra as the Bard within the Laughing Swan Inn. Yes, technically, this is Willawind.
Play it again, Willawind.
Growing up, amazingly, I somehow missed the Season 1 He-Man and the Masters of the Universe episode Evilseed. Well, in fairness, due to the UK broadcasting schedule on terrestrial TV, I had only 2 opportunities to see it during the 80s. The first time I became aware of the episode was when I was looking on a text-based website in late 1995 that listed American VHS cartoon releases and saw all of the tapes released with all of the episode titles. As I've said before on this channel, in early 1996, fellow He-Man and She-Ra fan Scott White sent me a VHS, which I still have, that featured a bunch of episodes, some that I'd never even seen. Evilseed was an immediately captivating episode. If you've ever seen this episode, you'll notice that the visuals are incredibly strong. This is because the director was Bob Arkwright, who, much like Tom Taylor and Owitz would do later, loved playing around with the stock system to get the most out of it. The sequences featuring Evilseed are noteworthy because of their expressiveness, many animated by Tom Cito. The interesting thing about the character Evilseed is that he remains cloaked, so all that we ever see of him is his hands and bulbous head. We do get a tease of his legs during the beautifully animated death sequence.
This is my time, but I will be back. I will be back. Yes, there will be another season.
The model pack for the episode reveals what was beneath the robe, and it was crazy. Earlier versions of Evilseed had him with a Venus flytrap of a mouth. It was rather terrifying. Hence why his face looks different here, but when we pull the camera back, boom! That is what Evilseed looks like, and it's pretty horrific. The episode did not call for Evilseed to disrobe because, as kids, I think this image would have given us nightmares. Actually, it kind of gives me nightmares now. You've all seen the He-Man and the Masters of the Universe episode Battle Cat, right? Granted, we have a somewhat problematic spelling of the fighting tiger within the title card, but the episode itself is often regarded as one of the best of the second season. The episode, penned by the legendary D.C. Fontana, one of the most famous and prolific writers of Star Trek, reveals how Prince Adam came to find Cringer, their evolving friendship, and the moment when Cringer witnessed his friend transform into He-Man, leading to the Cowardly Cat's transformation into Battle Cat.
Easy, Cringer. It's me, Adam.
However, in Michael Halperin's original Masters of the Universe series Bible, Battle Cat's origin is incredibly brief. The story states that, having received the power of Grayskull, the second time Prince Adam transformed into He-Man, the power from the sword shot upwards, glanced off the bright snow-capped peaks of the ice mountains, and shot back to the ground where it struck Cringer, transforming him into Battle Cat. Now, visually, I think that would have made for an interesting origin. The odd thing is that it is stated that Cringer is running next to Teela, so did she not wonder where Cringer had gone after being blasted by a bolt of energy? But, as I said, it's incredibly brief. In fairness to Michael Halperin, he wasn't tasked with writing an in-depth origin for He-Man's sidekick. He just had to get Battle Cat into the series Bible soon after He-Man's first appearance.